Crazy thing about this shirt, it was a little snug until I started releasing. Looking Glass. The Looking Glass. Dispersion versus Desperation. Dispersion, not desperation. The Looking Glass. How we look into our lives, how we look into our days, how we apply to ourselves. Dispersion. The ability to break down barriers to achieve union. The potential energy for a deep and fertile connection results in life-creating power. When we're looking into that looking glass, when we're looking into that prism, when we're looking into this prism factor into our lives, we got to ask ourselves some questions. Are we reaching? Is it reaching or is it reciprocal? Is it motive or is it motion? Is it heart or is it head? These are some of the questions that throughout my days in reflection, whenever I'm doing my meditations, how I'm starting my day, these are some of the things that I ask myself about me going into certain situations, because I understand that sacred energy exchange, that sacred energy exchange is more than just the simple of the aspects of the physical. I understand that my energy, I am energy, therefore I am sacred, therefore every time that I exchange my energy, I produce something. So I ask myself a question, what am I producing? Better yet, when I'm looking into that looking glass, what am I producing through? Am I allowing my energy to disperse freely into that flow through my emotions and coming into balance with that space? Or am I doing it through a sense of desperation, which leads to the aspects of the head, of trying to keep something, of trying to produce something in a space of lack? This is something that we get stuck in a lot of times with ourselves and our behavior. We usually try to create within a new space or in an old space that we have yet to learn the lesson to. We end up putting ourselves in the position to try to create something new within a space where it's not intended to be. We end up putting our energy into a space to try to create something, or with our that fertileness in that space, to try to create something to sustain. We're not tapping into that power of our growth. A lot of times we come into that space with ourselves. I remember coming into spaces with myself. I'm going to start y'all off with a story. On the way from the gym today, craziest thing ever, riding down the street, and I see a school bus in front of me. That's not the highlight of the story. On the school bus was the number 813. We building. On the school bus was the number 813. I was transported back to my middle school years, my middle passage, 6th, 7th, and 8th. And I was thinking about, I remember my bus being my bus number was 813. It was crazy for me. And I'm sitting there thinking about middle school, the middle passage. And I remember everything that I learned in the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade was based on coming into balance, 7 being that number for the creation, and then 8 being alchemy of creating something from the new. So I remembered my 6th, 7th, and 8th grade years, and I remember one funny instance that in the 6th grade, there was always 2 things that I could disperse in between. Now we know in our 6th and 7th grade years, for some of us, that was like your first crushes and your first thoughts of girls, your first thoughts of boys and anything of that nature. For some of us, not all of us. But this story is going to help resonate with everybody. And I'm sitting there in this space with myself, and I'm like, in the 6th grade, had my first, what you would call my first 2 crushes. One crush was of, now that I did that internal work, one crush was based on the thoughts in my head. One crush was based on the thoughts of my head. What I thought I deserved at that point in time from a space of where I was coming from in that space. The other one, the other crush in the aspect was of my heart. Was of my heart. Something that I had not yet discovered, that feeling of my heart, getting in tune with my aspects of my heart. So neither one was, because I was thinking about just basically school at this time. Wrestling and shit. Funny shit like that as a kid. But I took that moment in time and looking back at myself, I was like, through 2 different looking glasses, I saw my first reflections of the divine feminine aspect that was within me. The first time that I sat into that space, I saw through 2 different looking glasses and dispersed my energy, my emotions, my thoughts, my feelings, everything was dispersed through these 2 different glasses. And based on how I thought, either with my head or with my heart, is how I was going to move forward. Crazy thing, like when you start doing the reflective, when you start reflecting, going deeper into the reflections of your childhood, you really start picking it apart and really start looking at yourself. This is all in aspects of that shadow work. 7th grade, I learned my voice. I learned that I learned these aspects about myself. And in 8th grade, like most 8th graders, this is during the years of when there was no longer, the 9th grade was in high school. So the 9th grade was going to be, my mindset was in a state of chaos. Because 9 is that number of the chaos, the ethers. Of that chaos of finding myself in that next 4-year cycle. This is what I'm talking about. This is getting into the aspects of that looking glass for yourself. Tapping into yourself and looking through, is it through desperation? Or are you allowing the natural effects of the dispersion? When we build through desperation, remember, we build through a behavior. When we build through a behavior, everything to keep that, maintain that behavior stays within our contracted environment. We talked about it in the podcast. It stays in that contracted environment. A lot of the times we're looking through a looking glass based on our pain, our traumas, our pains, our traumas. I hate YouTube in their ads, but it's okay. Our pains, our traumas, our victimhoods. That's the looking glass that we like. That's the looking glass that we look through. And now, since we're looking through this looking glass, everything inside of our space becomes augmented. And the things that we're listening to, they might not be just what we need. We listen to them based on the act of replying, based on staying, reacting, going through that cycle of maintaining that behavior and keeping ourselves in that safety net. Even if your life was horrid, the only way to change it is to step outside of that safety net, that comfort zone. You got to step through that looking glass and actually understand that you are the fertile energy within your space when you break down the barriers. Whether you are breaking down the barrier or not, that's going to be your key. Because if you're not breaking down the barriers of the old self, you're not acknowledging the aspects of the old self, that energy still is going to be creating something within that space. So it's going to be creating them reflective points of that contracting environment. So your environment remains the same. And then when your behavior is now challenged, you look for things to fit your behavior, staying within the comfort zone. Like yesterday when I was talking about, you got to step out of your comfort zone. We got to step out of that comfort zone. In comfort is the stagnation. In comfort is that stalemate. In comfort you will get everything that you desire on either end of the spectrum, whether you're staying in your comfort zone or stepping out of your comfort zone. The quality of what you are going to receive is all based on being in that comfort zone or stepping out of that comfort zone. When I stepped out of my comfort zone, I was able to enjoy, even though it was a fucking crazy, it's a crazy ass process going through the healing process. I wouldn't change anything. I wouldn't change anything. Because if I change anything, then my investments and my return in my investments in getting through my day and winning my day and understanding that everything outside of me is something for me to reflect or is a reflection based on observation and experience, all of it would change. And based on still being in that cycle, it would just be the same result on the other end. This is what happens a lot of times. This is what happens a lot of times for us when we're taking that step. When you're coming into your healing process, when you want to come into that learning process, when you want to tap into that love with yourself, when you want to tap into that becoming self-sufficient, when you want to tap out of when you want to stop walking that line that I talked about yesterday, when you want to stop walking that line in between letting go and tapping in, when you want to stop walking on top of that barrier, when you want to stop walking on top of that barrier, looking and see if your barrier, your boundary's working, instead of standing behind the boundary that you set. When you're coming into this state of you are apologizing to yourself, and then you're understanding the only thing that I can accept in my apology based on to myself first is my very own changes in my behavior. The only true apology that we talked about on Monday, when we talked about on Monday, we talked about no apologies. The only apology is change behavior. So that moment that you feel sorry for yourself, the reason you can't go all the way through it is because you're not ready. You're not ready to change the behavior, because changing the behavior requires vulnerability to yourself. It requires that openness to yourself. It requires you to invest into the change. Accept the changes. Accept that things are not going to be the same. That way, when you come into that today being your only day that matters, you start understanding that everything outside of you is a reflection based on experience or observation. The experience is the emotional aspect. The observation is the lesson. Now it's time to learn that lesson. So now when you're inside of that space and you keep seeing the same things happening around you, but you don't have the same emotional response, you know that you are now observing the fruits of your labor through your lesson. Now you coming into that change, and now you winning that day. Now that you're tapped into winning your day, and now you're coming into this getting through your day, not just getting through your day based on motions and ulterior motives, but you're actually thinking about you're not thinking about reaching simply based on that desperation, that fear of decrease, or that fear of losing something. Now you're going to come into that space of reciprocal. Now you want things to be reciprocal within your space. Now you're looking for reciprocity. You're looking for reciprocity. But as we always come into that space, in order for you to receive it, you must first give it to yourself. In order for you to receive it, you must first give it to yourself. That love, you got to give it to yourself first. You got to define that love inside yourself first. That peace, that respect, that peace, that respect, that abundance that you're trying to tap into, and you want to be good with yourself. You got to give that stuff to yourself first. Outside of your comfort zone. Outside of your comfort zone. You got to initiate the destruction protocol. You got to initiate the destruction protocol. Friday night, that's tomorrow. Friday night, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Like similar to all my other videos. Friday night lectures, G.O.D Alkhemist is a YouTube channel. We are getting into the destruction protocol. Understanding, tapping into the design, the flaws in the human design, That means everything from releasing waste and taking things in to letting things out and defining that aspect into yourself. It's time for you to define not only the beautification process of what it's now time for you to stop just defining what you're putting in based on the emotional feeling and sitting there like, ooh, I feel good for putting this into myself. But then when it comes out, you don't know what it is. It's time to define what you're letting out. It's time to define the waste, because through the waste, the putrid, that's the alchemy. I want you to be the best. I desire you to be the best you. I desire you to tap into the best you. I desire for you to exceed all statutes and limitations. I desire you to really get to know yourself. But in order to get to know yourself, it's going to take 3 major keys: acknowledging, accepting, and the apology. Once you apologize, it's to change behavior. Now you're accepting the change behavior. Now you're acknowledging the change behavior. It all starts with your shadow work. That love of the life, that love of the lifetime that you're trying to tap into. If you don't understand, if you don't know you, then how do you know how to love you? How do you expect anything else to give that love to you, that respect to you, that peace to add in the ambience, to enhance and complement the peace of yourself, the inner peace, the inner love.
Grand rise, divine rise, blessed be to the day.
I desire you to be the best.
As Beyonce said, today is the only day that matters. Whether you're a king or a queen, whether you're a god or a goddess, whether you're a bruja, warlock,
everything from readings,
shaman, shamaness,
so we can get you into that.
It don't matter. Today is the only day that matters. We understand that from this point, everything is a reflection for us to observe and or experience. And everything that is experienced can be now learned through observation and vice versa. Welcome to the G.O.D podcast. I'm your host, your master of ceremonies, your occult psychologist, Papa Lucifer.
I love you.
And this week we get into primordial instinct. The biggest thing of understanding that the behavior is the effect of the emotional catalyst. You know, we break this down into the segments, into the session. In this week's section, we're going to get into the state of reaction.